In 2149, Earth finds itself ravaged by war and chaos, leaving behind a world of ruin. The aftermath of brutal chemical warfare has wiped out most of the population, and 9 years later, the story picks up in a time where only a handful of survivors remain. Among them is Darwin, who lives in a bunker, the last refuge for those fortunate enough to survive. His only connection to the outside world is through the computers in his makeshift homes. Every morning, Darwin eagerly powers up his computer, hoping for any sign of life from his mother. But each time the same message greets him, she's still asleep. Desperate for connection, he begins texting her, only to be interrupted by flashes of memories that momentarily pull him away from the screen. These memories remind him of a time before isolation, and occasionally he pulls himself away from the computer to take a brief ultrasound shower, the only routine break from the monotony. But most of the time, he's bound to his chair, his eyes fixed on the screen, waiting for a change in his endless, perpetual days. Meanwhile, he virtually extracts minerals from the Earth's surface, which were essential for constructing more advanced shelters. A news broadcast frequency reminds him of the strict prohibition against leaving the safety of the bunker due to the toxic air conditions with high contamination that still plague the surface. During his brief moment of respite, Darwin selects his lunch from the special window on his computer, a small act of routine in an otherwise monotonous existence. The food arrives promptly, as if to reinforce the reliability of the machine, his only companion. His days follow this rhythm, a cycle of working, eating, and playing computer games until bedtime. But even though he loses himself for hours in these games, they provide no lasting comfort and no escape from the emptiness that he feels. After each session, Darwin checks the computer again, hoping for something different, but the message remains the same, that his mother is still asleep. A pang of frustration rises within him, but he resigns himself to the cold truth. In his dreams, his fears take shape. Night after night, they haunt him, visions of his mother abandoning him in the bunker, despite the promise she made that he would eventually find a way out. These dreams were constant reminders of the isolation that he faces, of the broken promises, and the unrelenting wait for something he isn't sure will ever come. Next morning, as he navigates the camera on a tractor, something unusual catches his attention. A dog was being dragged into the bushes nearby. Just as he tries to navigate, the virtual team leader interrupts, forcing him to refocus on his task. Later, during a violent storm, Darwin wakes to discover that the bunker had lost power and is plunged into darkness, and a thunderstorm unexpectedly attacks the bunker. He repeatedly presses the emergency button, but to no response, and days pass and his situation deteriorates. With his malfunctioning computer worsening his condition and oxygen levels beginning to fall, Darwin realizes that no help was arriving. He was desperate to escape and decides to take a dangerous chance. He dons a respirator and attempts to open the door of the bunker, and when the button fails to work, he manually lifts the door, bracing himself for a glimpse of a world decimated by chemical warfare. As he steps outside only a few feet into the unknown, his respirator signals a drop in oxygen levels, forcing him to retreat. To his shock, the door doesn't lock behind him, causing panic to set in. Resigned to his fate, Darwin removes his mask, certain he will suffocate, but minutes later, he realizes that he can breathe the outside air unfiltered. With newfound hope, Darwin gathers a few essential items and ventures out, driven by the possibility of finding his long-lost mother. Every step was excruciating, as his body was weak from nearly a decade of confinement. The sound of birds was unsettling, and the relentless sun, combined with a lack of food, wears him down. Yet Darwin presses on, fueled by the desire for change. After some time, he reaches a machine and tries to signal for help, but his poor balance makes it impossible. Just as his resolve begins to falter, a familiar dog's bark echoes in the distance, reigniting a glimmer of hope. Spurred by this, he makes his way toward the green forest, where his intuition was proven right, and the soil was no longer toxic. Exhausted, he collapses and falls asleep, but the journey has only begun. In the heart of the forest, Darwin wakes to the persistent buzzing of mosquitoes and the familiar sound of a dog barking, and he spots the dog's owner, a young girl named Dara, who hesitates before approaching him. Darwin, having been silent for years, struggles to speak, but tries desperately to catch up with her, and realizing he needs help, Dara notices him and triggers an alarm, alerting the nearby camp of survivors who had escaped from the bunker. A concerned older woman, Lillian, seeing the commotion, instructs her children to hide while she prepares to meet the stranger. Understanding that Darwin is likely just as frightened as they are, she gently speaks to him about her home. While Darwin can understand her words, he's limited to computer-based communication and cannot respond verbally. He accepts the food she offers and eats it on the ground, slowly edging closer to the bowl each time she speaks. Eventually, Lillian tells him more about her home, and Darwin nods in agreement, signaling that he understands. Though his communication was confined to a computer interface, he agrees to stay at the camp for the night. Relieved to be in the company of other living beings, Darwin accepts Lillian to fetch a mattress, feeling a sense of comfort for the first time in years. Darwin tells himself that his stay at the camp is only temporary, and that his journey in the search of his mother will continue. Soon after, he finds himself seated at a table with the others, tasting tea for the very first time. Lillian, curious about him, begins asking questions. Stephen, noticing Darwin's inability to communicate verbally, gently places his hands on Darwin's and encourages him to pretend to type so that Lillian can read his responses. For hours, Darwin quietly observes this unfamiliar method of communication, feeling both disconnected and intrigued. Later, Dara applies sunscreen to Darwin, which initially scares him, but he quickly learns to trust her. Though he longs to ask Lillian's family about his mother, they have no information about her. Dara, understanding his uncertainty, tells him that he can leave whenever he chooses, but for now, he should rest for the night. As Darwin settles into sleep, he's plagued by a nightmare in which he searches for his mother, but is captured by a brain-scanning drone. The drone interrogates him, asking about the people he has encountered on his journey, and after a moment of comfort, Dara helps Darwin with his first shower in years, though he still keeps his clothes on. Dara shows him the basics of washing, offering assistance, but Lillian believes Darwin can manage on his own. Darwin changes into clean clothes, looking more like everyone else, and Dara then teaches him how to answer simple questions with common gestures, and Darwin, in turn, decides to stay longer at the camp. During his time there, Dara spends more time with him, teaching him how to plant seeds and draw in the sand. As days pass, Darwin begins to regain his ability to speak and starts helping Lillian with chores around the house, like setting the table. This is where Lillian notices a bond forming between them. The family continues with their daily routines, unaware that the warden's drone is lurking nearby, watching over them. In the afternoon, they enjoy a dance session, with Dara teaching Darwin a waltz. In return, Darwin shows her some dance moves he learned from video games. While walking through the forest, Dara shares the story of how her father broke the law and left to start a new life at sea, seeking to build a family. As Darwin grows closer to the family, he forms a deep connection with Lillian's children, particularly her daughter Dara. Beth, however, grows increasingly concerned that Darwin's presence could put them all at risk, especially with the government potentially hunting him. Lillian tries to reassure her, but she was fully aware of the danger of harboring a fugitive, and when Beth again expresses her worries, Darwin realizes that she is indirectly referring to him, and he understands that by sheltering him, they too are considered criminals, making them more vulnerable to capture. Lillian takes the children on a walk through the woods, and it's Darwin's first time seeing the river. He enjoys a peaceful dip in the wild waters and plays games with the children, and meanwhile, Dara leads Darwin to the top of a mountain where they have a meaningful conversation. Dara reflects on the expectations placed on fathers, lamenting how they're not supposed to abandon their families to start new lives in distant lands, and she expresses her longing for her beloved to stay with her forever. As the conversation draws to a close, Dara, with courage, confesses her love for Darwin, believing their connection is destined by fate, and then they share a kiss. At the same time, the rest of the family returns to camp, singing joyfully. Stephen, however, gets anxious and urges the others to keep quiet as they quietly try to run to the camp, and in the midst of all of this, Beth accidentally drops her handkerchief on the road, and a passing drone catches sight of it. The drone's alert triggers a scramble for cover as the family is made aware of the impending pursuit, and Lillian's impending concern was for her young daughter's safety, and they manage to evade the drone, which passes by without noticing them. Back at the camp, Beth lashes out at her mother, blaming her for attacking the drones by harboring Darwin, and Lillian reassures her, explaining that they will have to hide together in the camp for a while. Dara walks into her friend's room and finds Darwin's mattress empty, and concerned, she quickly steps outside and scans the yard, and it doesn't take long before she spots him standing alone, as if preparing to leave. Darwin turns to her and softly explains that he's leaving to protect his new family, to shield them from harm. His words, though calm, feel heavy in the air between them. Dara, overwhelmed by sadness, can no longer contain the emotions she'd been holding on to. Tears well up in her eyes, and then she quietly admits that she knew that he was going to leave, and Darwin tries to explain to reach out to her, but Dara pulls away, unable to bear the pain of watching him go. Without another word, she turns and walks away, her heart breaking as she leaves him behind. Lillian says her goodbye to him, while Dara stays inside. Darwin then confides in Lillian that his mission was to find his mother and bring her to a home like the one they shared, a place where she can experience life outside the bunkers. Meanwhile, Dara was alone in the forest, tears in her eyes as she watches her first love leave. Darwin, with determination, walks down the familiar path toward his mother's bunkers, and he moves carefully, evading the drones as he reaches the machine and uses the key Lillian gave him to call his mother. Hoping for a connection, Darwin tells his mother that he wants to see her again, and when the connection request is accepted, Darwin pleads with his mother to believe him before finally opening the door to the bunkers without asking permission. When Darwin arrives at the massive iron door, he knocks and reassures his mother that she doesn't need to worry about the polluted air outside. But instead of a response, an eerie silence fills the space, followed by the sudden blare of an alarm. A drone flies over inside the bunker, asking Darwin to identify himself and explain his whereabouts. Thinking quickly, Darwin invents a story claiming that he had been inside the bunker the entire time, and he manages to go out to help for his mother. Someone from the government, seemingly convinced, tells the resident not to leave the bunker without prior notice, and Darwin succeeds in convincing his mother to unlock the door, allowing him inside. Finally, the iron barrier lowers, and the woman, wild and guarded after years of seclusion, stares at the son that she had last seen 9 years ago. Darwin looks at his mother's computer and realizes that she hadn't had any contact with anyone in all that time, and he enters his code to access the archive and finds camera footage of his trip to the bunker and the trip that he had with Lillian's family. Unexpectedly, Darwin tells his mother that he needs to leave, and as he heads out, she calls after him, asking if he had finished playing Stream Drifters, and Darwin stops for a moment and replies that he had already reached the paradise level, and with that, he walks away, leaving his mother to think about his words. As the movie ends, the mother and son's fears are finally erased, and Darwin then goes to Dara, finding her at the top of the mountain, and their reunion brings her happiness, and they share a kiss, and afterwards, Darwin joins Lillian's family once more.